You know, there's 6,000 miles of coastline around the British Isles, and only a few hundred miles of those are inhabited. Most of it is impossible to get to by foot. But if you've got access to a small boat, it opens up a whole new world for you to explore. Being a lifeboatman, I've seen countless isolated coves, beaches, ruins and abandoned settlements, all within easy access, providing you have one thing, a boat. The great thing is, it doesn't have to cost a fortune. You can pick a second-hand inflatable up for a few £100s. And you don't have to stay in B&Bs either. There's plenty of isolated beaches for you to camp the night. Now in this programme, I'll be meeting members of the R.I.B International Cruising Club on their 3-day cruise to the Isles of Scilly. Our journey begins in Fowey in Cornwall, with the prospect of ideal sun and perfect sea conditions.
A few days before the cruise, I met up with organiser Hugo Montgomery Swan to discuss the route and look at the local charts. The weather was looking perfect for the outward journey, but the long-range forecast revealed an area of low pressure making its way towards us from the southwest.
And they're talking about southwesterlies for maybe up to 6 coming that direction, so it's going to be sort of across our bow. And if that dirty weather kicks in, then it could be quite a sea, and of course
an interesting journey.
Yes, which was what it's all about.
I'm looking forward to that.
I think that the nautical expression is interesting, isn't it? Perhaps so.
Brian was also joining us, and he showed me how his R.I.B was set up for offshore cruising.
Brian, I believe this is your first R.I.B cruise with the R.I.B International party.
It's the first cruise of R.I.B International, although I have been down to the Scillys on my own before.
Yes, I think the boat speaks for itself. If you could just go through with me the equipment that you have on the boat that you think is essential for R.I.B cruising.
Okay. Well, obviously, apart from the boat and the engine itself, I find the most essential piece of equipment is a very good GPS chart instrument, which not only tells you exactly where you are, but tells you where you're going and points out areas of potential danger and so on.
I believe you were saying that the accuracy of the GPS has improved recently because the error's been taken off. Is that correct?
American Department of Defense apparently switched the error off, and this is now said to be accurate down to within about 14 feet or 5 metres.
And if you can go through the rest of the equipment, if you would.
Okay, well on this side of the boat we have the very latest VHF DSC radio, which is a digital radio conforming to the latest GM DSS specification. We can drive manually on a compass, and normally my route will be up here on a separate sheet of paper, so that if everything fails I can drive by the nav-aid points on the paper using the compass and the rev counter on the engine, which tells me how far and how fast to go. Well, the boat itself is a 6.2 metre Avon Adventure R.I.B, and it's fitted with a 130 horsepower Honda 4-stroke engine, which means it's very economical on fuel.
I was given the chance to helm the R.I.B International Boat Grey Seal, and boy does it handle. The best things do come in small packages. It's only 4.8 metres long, but this R.I.B craft is extremely responsive. The Yamaha 50 engine is superb. You hardly know it's there until you feel that surge of power when you push the throttle forward. One tip though, if you ever get to helm this boat, don't forget to put your dry suit on.
It's 8:30 on this beautiful August morning. We're in Fowey. It's a very tranquil setting at the moment. Quite excited, waiting for the R.I.B.sters to arrive. They said they'd be here between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. All the equipment on the go. I'd be quite interested to see what sort of people go ribbing, what makes them want to do this in a group. But I have to say I do admire them. I like the idea of being able to come away from a beautiful harbour like this, to go down the estuary, outside into the English Channel, the western approaches, and go down the coast to find some really unspoilt parts of the coastline. Parts of the coastline that people never ever get to see in a new form of transport. It's a great prospect. The Ribsters have been into Salcombe, I've seen them en masse, but I've never actually been part of the cruise before. So I'm looking forward to the see what sort of camaraderie that there is on the Rib cruise.
I mean, how do you see the sea conditions on our trip?
Oh, well, hopefully the sea conditions are going to be very good today. There's an excellent forecast, but sometimes a flat sea isn't as challenging or as exciting as more of a sea running if we had a bit of a blow going. So I'm hoping that we're going to get a mixture of different sea conditions. If we can find an outfall somewhere and a bit of tide running, I'm sure it'll make it a lot more interesting.
Once a busy ancient port with a considerable China clay trade, Fowey now relies more upon its bustling summer tourist industry. Its fine natural harbour provides a perfect haven for seafarers. And with weather like this, it's idyllic. But where were the Ribsters?
5 to 10. The Ribsters say they'll be here at 10 o'clock. We've got all our gear. There's quite a bit of weight in there. I don't know whether they'll have a sense of humour failure when they see all the bags. Quite excited though, I must admit. I've always wanted to go on a Rib cruise. I've been out on a Rib by myself and with other people plenty of time, but never in a flotilla like this. I like the idea because I think there's safety in numbers, and I think that when you've got a group of people, someone has always got something to bring into that group. So we should get a lot out of it, I feel.
Minutes later, they were here, having just taken on fuel for the 55-mile trip to the Scillies. I met with Hugo again, whose predictions of a flat, calm sea seemed spot on. And my journey was to begin in Twister, the largest rib in the party at 8 metres. Fortunately, Graham, Twister's skipper, did have a sense of humour and plenty of below-deck stowage for all the filming gear. Graham told me that he uses Twister not only for pleasure, but as part of his business, taking clients out for corporate entertainment and team building events. We proceeded down the River Fowey toward the open sea in blistering sunshine, with a light wind which was very welcome. Our course would take us in a southwesterly direction, out across Mevagissey Bay at a comfortable cruising speed of 27 knots. Keeping within a mile or so of the coastline, we would be striking out past Dodman Point, then past Falmouth, toward the Lizard. The reef, known as the Manacles, which has caught out many a vessel, will provide little in the way of excitement in these conditions, so our passage to Cadgworth for lunch promised to be very relaxing. Joining us for their first family cruise together was Rob and Kay and the two girls in Sabre Drive, Delta's first Rib built in 1984. Powered by a diesel stern drive together with an outboard, the boat has been on voyages with previous owners around Britain, even as far afield as Iceland and Norway. Also with us was Paul Lemmer's party in a Gemini Rib. Built in South Africa, these Ribs have a deep V hull with true offshore capability. The wind subsided and the words flat and mill pond came to mind as we continued. Cruising weather just doesn't get any more perfect than this. Brian joined us off Dodman Point, with smaller boats like grey seal hugging the coastline and taking in the scenery. Graham's boat was very impressive, and we were soon swapping yarns on boats and ribs and all their handling characteristics. The pace though was a little too leisurely for Paul, who had found the perfect resting place. However, moments later he was up for a rendezvous a few miles east of Cadgworth with a Beneteau cruiser. I would be spending the remainder of the journey from Cadgworth on board this boat, which would provide a more stable camera platform to get the shots of the ribs in action. This is what ribbing's all about, getting in and exploring parts of the coastline most people can't get to. Rob found it hard to leave, but other ribs were joining us shortly, so we had to push on.
So nice round here, isn't it?
Head on to Cadgworth now.
It was a short hop across the bay for lunch, so it was full speed ahead to Cadgworth.
That's what we're going to ask you. We know it is Cadgworth. I've now got it on the map.
We're just coming into Cadgworth. Never been here before, but it looks absolutely unspoilt, absolutely delightful.
Two larger ribs, Blue Ice and Torridon, had already arrived and would be cruising with us to St Mary's, making a total of 8 boats.
Well, we'll pick everybody up on the rib concept.
Maybe it's lunch there. Seafood.
There's a hole in the wall.
Having missed breakfast in order to get to Fowey in time, I was starving by the time I stepped ashore, so the Cadgworth Cove Inn was a real lifesaver. It was also a good opportunity to sample another of the delights of ribbing. Good food, good drink, and good company. Unspoilt Cornish fishing villages like this are a rare find, so it was sad to leave without having time to explore. Waiting on the beach were Ian and Ben, who had come over on Torridon, a 6.5 metre rib tech.
Is this your first time on a rib?
Yeah, it is.
Have you done any other sort of sailing or boating before?
Yeah, I've done a bit of sailing.
Really?
But
What, dinghy sailing or ocean sailing? Go on, spill the beans, go on, tell me.
what I'm saying, sort of inshore, I'm not quite sure how to describe it. Basically, I've done a bit around
Sort of coast
Corsica,
hopping.
Sardinia. Coast hopping.
Yeah.
So that's what I was looking for.
Mediterranean summer holiday.
And how does this compare with sailing then?
Different kettle of fish, actually. Obviously, slightly different speeds involved.
Yeah. Less exertion?
I don't think so, because it can be very physical when it gets rough.
Yeah, exactly,
Because I've done this before. Because my cousin's got a scorpion in. He lives in Athens, and he's got a house in Corfu, so he goes out there. And when the waves go up, I mean, particularly if you're at the front of the boat, apparently somebody has to be to keep the weight balanced.
I think when we've got flat conditions like this, going fast is brilliant. But it'll just be nice to see how the boats handle a sea.
Yeah.
And I think that's when it'll really come into its own, really. It'll be much more exciting. There's not many women of your age group here, is there? I mean, is that going to be a problem?
So that's when the mermaids come into play.
Testosterone-oriented sport.
I've heard the ladies of the Scilly are famous.
Middle-aged men looking for a bit of action
much?
No, I think there are a few hen nights in the Scilly Isles this weekend, which is really why a lot of males are here this weekend.
So it doesn't disappoint you that there's not enough females on here then?
Well,
That comes later.
I think there's the Miss Scilly Isle competition going on as well, so have to wait and see what's in store.
Right.
The only whitewater thrills on offer was playing in the wake of the cruiser. Ian and Ben probably had a more exciting ride on Torridon than I was having aboard the cruiser. I don't know whether it was the flat calm seas or the comfy cushions, but I was soon drifting away in a world of my own. Was I dreaming? Or was this really the famous lighthouse known as Wolf Rock? Built in 1870, we've all seen pictures of ferocious waves breaking over the top. So it was almost eerie to see it in such calm seas. However, there was no time to stop and we were soon off again. Then, less than an hour later, and dead ahead, my first sight of the Isles of Scilly. Located 28 miles southwest of Land's End, the Scillys are a small cluster of rugged granite islands, ranging from small pinnacles of rock to St Mary's, the largest island with an area of about 4 square miles. Warmed by the Gulf Stream, they really are a world apart. I couldn't wait to explore. We'd arrived at Hewtown, the capital, and the ideal place from which to investigate the other islands. So we made our way to the quayside to find out where the visitors' moorings were.
Have we just picked up any buoy?
Can I quickly unload this? Chuck my life jacket over. You can have
Paul, are we just picking up a buoy?
Yeah.
Anyone?
Yeah, yellow ones.
Yellow ones.
Just arrived at St Mary's after a leisurely 2.5 hour crossing from Cadgwith.
Sorry?
Very exciting.
I don't know.
It was superb visibility. You could see all the ribs. They tend to cluster in 2s and 3s, and they come across, they find their own level, their own comfort as far as they go across,
I'll take that one.
and they're here in no time. We've all seemed to have arrived at the same time. Hugo sorted out all the moorings. We're going to pick up this yellow mooring and to shore for the night.
Always wearing ears on the inside. Yeah, that's supposed to be quite good. You've been down here before?
What is
Well, Hugo has just dropped everybody ashore. Very good of him in the little small rib, and he's just mooring up, and he's just about to come back ashore in a very unusual manner. Will he still have his underpants on when he gets out? That's what we're all wondering.
Are you freezing, Daddy? Are you freezing?
Did you manage to find your wallet? Frozen.
Well done, Hugo.
Oh, well done, Hugo. I've got a dinghy if you want to borrow it.
Painful.
So do you always do this, Hugo?
Whenever I get the chance, of course. Yes, normally I like to throw myself into a bath of freezing ice. But, you know, one has to make do.
Excellent journey. I really enjoyed that coming over with the ribs. Staying at the Godolphin, I'm absolutely knackered.
It was a perfect end to a perfect day. Things were also looking bright the next morning. After an early morning stroll along the shoreline and a look around the harbour, I took the opportunity to have a few words with Hugo and asked him how he first got involved with ribs and ribbing.
Well, I've always loved the sea. I was brought up in Fowey, Cornwall, or near Fowey I should say, and my wife and I were living in London. We'd moved up there and been there for several years, and I longed to do something adventurous and get out in the fresh air. And we bought this little Zodiac inflatable actually, and we went up and down the Thames and had many adventures in that. Then I read an article in a marine boating magazine here in the UK which spoke about these ribs, and I didn't know what a rib was, but it had this beautiful picture of this boat climbing a lovely blue sea somewhere off the Shetland Isles, and it just grabbed my attention, and I wanted to find out more about these rigid inflatable boats. So we did a bit of investigating, and we finally saved our pennies and bought an Avon, a little Avon, 3.5 metre Avon rib, which we had many adventures in, and that was small. I can remember one of the first things that we did was to go on a cruise from Lyme Regis down to Lizard and back, round trip of about 400 or so miles I suppose, and we had an absolutely marvellous time. From that time on I was hooked, and we tried to get something a little bit bigger and a little bit better, and that's how it all began really. One quite interesting experience occurred 2 years ago. We, at the end of the season, planned a trip to Brittany and back from the south coast, and we had a wonderful time. It was over 3 days, but on the return leg the weather did change and it blew up somewhat, and we left St Malo in pretty dirty conditions, about half a dozen boats all travelling together, and we got into to Jersey. We refuelled, the weather cleared but the wind freshened, and when we left St Helier we made our way up along the side of the island past Corbière, and it was wind against tide, and I can clearly remember these very exciting monstrous seas rolling up towards us, the sunlight shining through the wave face, and you had this brilliant turquoise sea with a foaming white cap and the sun shining through down at you. Of course we're relatively small boats, and by that I mean we're close to the water surface, so you're not on a a tall flybridge or anything of that kind. So you really get to experience the elements in their fullest sense. But my engine wasn't pulling as it should. A plug had come off, one of the spark plugs, I think, at the time. And although I didn't know what the problem was, that it just had no guts to it. And I was having to climb seas that were in excess of 15 feet and almost vertical, with curling tops, with a third of my power down, which was very difficult. And we really had to assist the boat in every way that we could in order for her to climb over these seas. We get onto the crest, and then we just drop vertically down the other side, with another one rolling up to meet us. It was very, very exciting. Paul, have you got spare life jackets?
Yes, loads of stones, clothing, everything, got everything.
Hugo had arranged a day-long exploration of some of the islands in the archipelago. So our flotilla set off, following the lead boat, Twister. There's almost 100 miles of coastline to explore here, and I was amazed by its rugged natural beauty. Our guide was Osbert Hicks, a local who's lived here all his life. We slowly made our way toward the smaller islets and rocky outcrops, which provide perfect havens for seabirds and seal colonies. And it wasn't long before the seals were coming out to meet us.
Fishermen make to all these seals?
They don't like that chap out there. He doesn't like them at all.
They can get through a fair bit, can't they?
They don't touch their crabs or lobsters or anything.
Yeah.
All their bait, their rats bait, and all
really?
that sort of thing, their mullets and all that. They play havoc with them.
Oh, almost like they're coming out to meet us, aren't they?
Oh yes, yes, yes.
What sort of seals are these, Osbert?
Probably just the normal grey Atlantic seal, as far as I would think. Their species. But I say we do get the migratory ones, and they're a very much lighter colour.
There's one right here. Look at this one.
Are they sort of protected?
Protected? Oh yes, yes. There's a mandatory fine. I think if anybody destroys them, fishermen would like to destroy them, but I think it's a mandatory fine of about £5,000 if you're caught destroying them. But they're increasing like nobody's business.
How do they annoy the fishermen?
Oh, catching their livelihood, their wet fish. They don't worry them with their crayfish or lobsters, crabs or anything like that. But it's the wet fish that they get a bit annoyed. They tear their nets, rob their fish. I know. They're entitled to live as much as we are, I suppose, but it's a bit annoying. Place.
Osbert, can you tell me about the Mini Haha, believed to be the most profitable wreck that's ever been wrecked on these islands?
Oh yes, she certainly was the most profitable. She was coming home from the States or South America, across the Atlantic, and it was very, very thick fog. And she got just to the wrong side of this rock, suddenly realised where she was.
Yes.
And turned to starboard to go out around the back of the Bishop, go out to the south, and found the bottom was a little bit too close to the top.
Yeah.
And woof, she was there. She was there for several weeks while they chucked all the cargo over the side. They had steam.
What sort of cargo did they have on board?
Totally general cargo, from bullocks to pianos to sewing machines, you name it. It was on board.
That would help the economy of the island tremendously, wouldn't it?
Yes, there was a lot of salvage done by the islanders, including all the animals.
Yes.
I think they're practically all saved and taken ashore to the uninhabited island of Samson.
Really?
Eventually transported to the mainland.
And it was very apt that she hit the rock known as the
Scilly.
Yep.
Scilly Rock. It's the actual rock. It's Scilly Rock.
It just reinforces, it gives a history behind it. It's
Yes.
not just a rock anymore, is it? You've got something that
Yes.
imagine what was happening.
It's uncanny, but ribsters always know where to find the best pubs. On the island of St Agnes, I spoke to rib veteran Paul Lemmer.
Paul, you're probably the most experienced ribster here. Can you tell me exactly how you got involved with ribbing?
Well, I started back in the 1960s, actually, believe it or not. 1968 was the first time I went to the Channel Islands. Went to Alderney from Southampton in a rib. It seemed a bit of a crazy thing to do, 12'6" long and a tiny little 20 horsepower outboard motor on the back. But so I suppose serious cruising, really, the magazine has R.I.B International magazine has sort of started people thinking about cruising long distances, and they generate a lot of interest amongst different readers, and people here today are coming for the first time on something as an extended cruise, and it's great fun. Families, a lot of the boats here have got children on board. It's fantastic. It's really enjoyable.
Do you prefer ribs because of the safety aspect or sea handling? Which is the aspect that really fulfills the criteria for you?
I suppose the fact is that they're really like a 4x4 on the water. They're very, very versatile. They can just about do anything. They can come alongside without having to put fenders out. If you get swamped, you float. They're very stable at rest, and for families and for people who just want safety first, they are the answer. They can go anywhere, they can do anything that perhaps a pure fiberglass boat can't do.
What's the most dangerous sea conditions you've ever encountered in the rib?
The most dangerous, I suppose, probably in the Channel Islands, wind over tide, going up a channel where the seas are so steep that you can't actually do anything. You just have to sort of stop and hope that you get through the next bit. And I was actually, 2 weeks ago, I was completely overwhelmed by waves. I was taking a boat back to England from Herm in the Channel Islands. I went into the Little Russell Channel. It was blowing about for 6 to 7. Initially I went out through this terrible sea, and it was so rough I thought it was ridiculous and crazy, and turned around to come back. But unfortunately in the following sea I was climbing up mountains, and when I got up the top of one particular wave, on the other side of it there was nothing, just a great big hole. And I went down the back of this wave at some 20 knots with the engine in neutral, and it buried its nose, and the wave in front decided to deposit itself on top, and of course the wave I'd just got over decided to deposit its remains on top of me as well, and I was actually floating in the sea with no boat visible. There was just my bag in front, a red bag, dry bag, floating, and next to me there was a flexible fuel tank, and no boat. The boat had gone actually, it was completely disappeared. But of course it's only a question of a few moments, but it seemed like a lifetime, you know. And it came up underneath me, and I was lying across the windscreen. But there's three things, you see. If the engine's running, if you're not injured, and the boat's still floating, then you're in pretty good shape. So we just opened the throttle and deposited the water over the transom and through the self-bailers, carried on and got back to Guernsey and took the aeroplane home.
Do you think it was the quality of the rib that you're here today talking? I
think the fact that it was a rib, if it had been a fiberglass boat, definitely would have sunk. I mean, it would have been gone. I wouldn't have been here talking to you now about that. But yes, ribs are good, and I wouldn't have been out there in anything but a rib. So I knew I was safe.
After lunch, we made our way to the second largest island in the group, Tresco, which has an amazing diversity of landscape and scenery. And our transportation was waiting for us on the quayside.
Where's the tube? We're in the tube.
Find a gap. We knew that.
Yes.
Where are we going now?
We're going to see the Valhalla Figurehead Museum at the Abbey Gardens on the island here of Tresco. We're just taking sampling some of the local transport, which is different to say the least. Yes, it is comfortable, isn't it? Very comfortable.
Like a red
Sublime to ridiculous.
Well, it certainly hasn't got a tube around the side of it.
I don't think be much profit, he said 6.
The same type of fuel.
Yeah, mate.
The Abbey Garden has a magnificent collection of subtropical and exotic plants famous throughout the world. Here you can see plants from South Africa, Australia and New Zealand, all thriving in Tresco's warm air and rich soil. But for me, the highlight of the visit was the Valhalla collection, a sombre display of magnificent figureheads, all from sailing ships that have come to grief along this perilous coast. Each face has its own tragic story to tell.
I think this is the most poignant part of the R.I.B cruise so far, coming to see these figureheads from ships that were wrecked off these very treacherous islands. Just goes to show the fragility of vessels around these waters. These granite peaks that stick out of the western approaches have wrecked mariners for centuries, but it's only recently, when we've had modern navigation techniques, that we can navigate these waters with some degree of accuracy and safety.
The weather was clouding over as we made the short hop back to St Mary's late in the afternoon. It was our last night together, so we'd all arranged to meet for a meal. By now, we were all getting to know one another, and skippers were deciding who to pair up with for tomorrow's passage home. Although the approaching weather front was looking ominous, the alcohol was flowing nicely and spirits were high. Now it was up to Hugo to rally his troops.
The weather forecast is essentially dreadful. No, it's not too bad. It's going to be blowing 3 to 4 through the night, increasing 5 during the morning, increasing 6 in the afternoon. Southwesterly, so we're going to have a downhill slide all the way back to Penzance, all the way back to Blizzard, all the way back to Fowey, and we're going to be running together, obviously, as much as we possibly can. But visual contact could be difficult in our boat, in the mist and the rain and the fog. And of course, with a 4-6 astern, we could be talking 20-foot seas plus, couldn't we? Really, it's quite possible. It's quite possible. If we see Wolf Rock Lighthouse, we'll be lucky. That's how big they're going to be. So stick together. we shall arrange everybody to pair up together, to duplicate their resources and their equipment, and that'll increase the safety factor by 2. So there we are. That's essentially it. So 10 o'clock we're underway. 4-6 astern, southwesterly, and bon voyage to you all. It's been nice knowing you. Thank you.
A bit ominous.
Yes. Say goodbye now. Say your goodbyes now.
There was a red sky in the morning. Not a good omen. It's 9:30 on St Mary's. It's a very cloudy, overcast day. We've got a forecast of force 3 to 4 coming from the southwest, increasing in the afternoon to force 6. The boat that we're going to be in today is John Lancaster's, and I'm going to have a word with John Lancaster. He's a very experienced mariner with lots of sea miles under his belt. John, you've had a lot of various boats in your time.
Yes.
You've come back to a RIB now.
Yes.
Can you tell me the reasons why?
Yes, our last boat was a big 45-foot boat, weighed 32 tons. Very seaworthy boat, but the maintenance problem was immense, not only in cost, but in terms of manpower. And frankly, the thought of anti-fouling that hull, again, fills me with horror. So we sold it 3 years ago, and we wanted a boat which would be able to go to sea with reasonable safety and be able to get out of the weather if the weather turned nasty. So it's an affordable sea boat which we keep on the drive at home, and it suits our purposes wonderfully, just my wife and I, usually.
Your seafaring experience speaks an awful lot on this boat, and what I'd like you to do is go through with me the safety aspects that you have on the boat and the boat in general.
First of all, we have a standard fixed VHF radio set which enables us to call for help and enables us to hear other people calling for help. This has a line of sight range, maximum about 30 miles I would guess. We also have a handheld VHF set as a backup. In terms of navigation, we've got a standard magnetic compass backed up by an electronic compass, and there's a directional facility on the GPS. Of course, the GPS gives us positional information, and naturally we carry the usual chart. We have an echo sounder which tells us how much water we've got underneath us. These other instruments are concerned with rate of fuel usage and engine RPM and speed. It's a single Yamaha engine. It's a 2-stroke engine, and that gives us a speed of about 48 knots, I suppose.
No one would ever go out deliberately in adverse sea conditions, but a mariner can always get caught out in adverse weather. What's the worst weather you've ever been caught out in a RIB?
Okay. In a RIB only, going across the Dover Strait, wind against tide, we're going down from Harwich to Saint-Vary-sur-Somme, which is about 120 miles due south. We had passed Ramsgate and passed Dover, and the tide was running out to the west and the wind suddenly sprung up. We had a nasty, short, sharp chop. The guy with me, a friend of mine, said, gosh, he said the waves are about as long as the boat. They weren't, of course. They're about 6 or 7 feet high. And that's about the worst short, sharp sea condition I've been in a RIB.
John, how long have you been RIB cruising for now? And how many RIB cruises have you been on?
RIB cruises, 5 years. We've done 3 in Scotland, doing about 300 miles, 400 miles over the week. I run an East Coast cruise each year, and we've done 3 of those. And I've done previous Cornish cruises, the aim being to see the local harbours and creeks and boozers, and do about 60 miles in a day, racking up about 400 miles in a week, I suppose. It's a good way to see the country.
How does that compare with the other sailing and boating that you've done in the past?
Okay, well, our last boat was an Inchcape 45, a big, heavy, very seaworthy boat, which would cruise through almost anything at about 7 knots if you motor sailed. The problem was it took us such a long while to get anywhere that we never really went further than Belgium, Holland and the Channel Islands. And you can't tow 32 tons, you see. So you're stuck with a long sea passage and time tends to run out. The RIB is an ideal boat for dashing away for the weekend. Any part of Europe, really, I suppose, a long weekend. So that's why we've got a RIB.
Are you going to stay with RIBs for the foreseeable future?
Until I get too old to manage them, yes. And then I'll probably end up with a little 12-foot sailing boat in the harbour.
John, thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to my passage with you back to Falmouth. Thank you.
I hope the pleasure's yours.
The sea state was relatively calm as we set off aboard Blue Ice to Falmouth, accompanied by Brian in his Avon. Our return passage would take us via Wolf Rock Lighthouse, a little over 50 nautical miles in total. The Gemini Rib, Grey Seal and Torridon were making good speed and had decided to push on towards Land's End in time for lunch. We'd be taking it easier, heading in a northeasterly direction towards Lizard Point. The visibility and conditions were steadily deteriorating. We now had to stick together in case either boat got into difficulty.
We're exactly halfway now between the Scillys and Falmouth on our last leg on this Rib cruise. The weather conditions are worsening and we're really putting the boats through the paces. I have to say I'm enjoying this far more than the flat conditions we experienced on our passage over. This is more what ribbing's all about. It really puts these boats through the paces, and I have to say this Scorpion is a very impressive boat. The other lead boats have gone ahead. We're behind with one of the stragglers. We're staying with him because he hasn't got a radio at this time. We feel it's prudent to be with him on the return leg. We can possibly run faster than this and smoother, but John's decided to stay at this speed, so we're going to go with that. It's a much more interesting trip than the trip over which we had on the cruiser.
The weather was slowly closing in on us, and Blue Ice was now down to about 20 knots. We reached Wolf Rock Lighthouse just after 11. It was more recognisable now, lashed by the wind, the rain and the waves.
That's an awesome sight there, seeing those waves break over the rocks there.
Yes, we'd like to be down to leeward of it.
I must say, I'm very impressed with your boat.
Thank you.
I'm very impressed with your boat handling skills.
Try.
And I can see that you have a healthy respect for the sea.
Well, it's a killer. If you let it, it'll have you.
Yeah. There's a lot of people, I think, these days don't have the respect that I think is necessary, especially if they're going to go out in the weather conditions that we're in today.
Okay, well, I think we've probably seen enough of Wolf Rock.
As the waves increased, John asked me whether I'd like to take the helm. Driving a boat like this, on the plain, in these conditions, was not going to be easy. The wave patterns were irregular and the boat was frequently airborne. I instinctively throttled down, but we were now making less than 10 knots. The wind was increasing to a force 6 and we needed to head for shelter as quickly as possible. The constant slamming of the hulls was having its effect on the boats and the crews. A handrail had snapped off on the Avon and Brian had injured his back. Our bilge pump couldn't cope with the amount of seawater taken on board and now had given up altogether. Directly ahead of us lay the Manacles, where the jagged rocks and uneven seabed combined to produce large breaking seas which can catch out even the most experienced mariner. I decided to give the manacles a very wide berth. We were able to avoid the worst of it, but it wasn't over yet. The waves were relentless, constantly trying to push us away from where we were heading. With poor visibility, there was no sight of land. We were now totally reliant upon our GPS and compass to get us back home. An hour later, and we'd been at sea for almost 4 hours. By now, we were all wet, hungry and exhausted. Despite our shared love of ribs, what we all wanted to do now was step ashore and have a hot drink. The conditions had improved though, and spirits were high. Land couldn't be far away now. Then, out of the mist, there it was, St Anthony's Head, the entrance to Falmouth Harbour. John called Falmouth Coast Guard to let them know we'd arrived safely. We made our way through the driving rain toward the visitors' pontoon. It was good to be in. This was an experience I'd never forget. Although my rib cruise was over, Grey Seal and the other ribs were struggling through the 4-6 conditions all the way back to Fowey. They'd all returned safely, although not all ribs had survived unscathed. Grey Seal's A-frame had parted company with the transom just off the Lizard. Fortunately, no one was injured.
The water flooding out of the estuary.
So did you call into Falmouth at all?
No. No.
That's why you went there?
That's why we weren't there.
How do these sort of conditions compare to some of the other cruises that you've sort of been on?
This can be quite typical. You generally get a good run one way and a rougher run the other, just to keep you on your toes. But Steve was driving the rib craft, and for a little 4.5 metre, she did really well. Really well. Yeah. Interesting stuff.
I want a beer.
I changed my mind and had a pint of vodka with Graham, who'd come over earlier, accompanied by Sabre Drive.
Yeah. This has been your first rib cruise. How enjoyable has it been for you?
It's been absolutely wonderful. I mean, it's the first time I've done a distance cruise like this, sort of 7 hours or more, and obviously departing on Friday in beautiful weather. It's just been a pleasure. It's a lot of fun.
On the return leg, we had quite a big sea running.
We did.
Have you been in conditions like that before?
Yeah, a couple of times, just around the back of the Isle of Wight. You know, the western approaches roll in there. But today, particularly when we came round Lizard Point, we had some waves that were, I mean, we were in a 30-foot boat and we were going up the face of the wave, and we still had 3 foot of wave above us crashing down over the top of the boat. So it was, yeah, very exciting. Big seas, but a lot of fun to navigate through. And I mean, that is in essence the beauty of a rib, because we can have a very deep V hull, and the tubes are what stops the boat sinking in, so you can have the best of both worlds. That's what ribbing's all about.
Now, what's the biggest sea that you've ever been in?
probably today, just coming around the Lizard, was probably as big a sea or as choppy sea we've ever been in. And it was coming in off the beam and trying to push you inland all the time, so just maintaining your heading and keeping the boat pointing where you're wanting to go. So probably today.
Really?
Yeah, literally.
And did you find that even though you were in adverse conditions, being with other boats was a help or a hindrance to you?
Oh, very much a help. I mean, you've always got the confidence of the other boat navigating as well, and it's just nice to have other people around. You never know how quickly the weather's going to change, if the fog's going to come in or the mist rolls in, or you do have a problem, you lose electronics, and reading a chart on a rib at 30 knots is not the easiest thing to do. No. So it's a confidence factor, and as I said before, it's just the pleasure of running with another rib. It's just great fun.
It's about 3 hours now since we've come back into Fowey, and as you can see the weather's a little bit grey and misty. We set off in perfect sunshine in absolutely ideal conditions, which was super. Over in the Scillies the weather deteriorated and we came back in quite adverse conditions, and I think that demonstrates just how vulnerable we all can be as small boat owners, especially by ourselves. But cruising with other people means that if we get a problem, and we had several problems on this passage back, we had an A-frame go down, bilge pump not working, somebody's handrail broke. If you're with another boat, they're there to give you assistance, and I think that's so crucial. And it was very comforting to be in adverse conditions with like-minded people with their ribs, all looking after each other.
For me, the rough weather we encountered ranks as a real high point. So too was the sense of being part of a unique group, all sharing a passion for ribs. But above all, I won't forget the sheer exhilaration of actually helming one of these four-wheel drives of the sea. If you have an inflatable boat or rib and would like to take part in an organised cruise, then either RIB International or the British Inflatable Boat Owners Association will be able to supply you with details of organised cruises in your area. I'm sure you'll have as much fun cruising as I did.